About a year back, I did a couple of videos rating various brands, what they were good at, not good at, their best products, and whether or not I'd pay retail. Well, I'm back, and this time we're only looking at brands that mostly sell stuff below $1,000. Tissot, Hamilton, Seiko, and maybe some color brands too. Let's dive in. It's actually starting to get hard to get non-Asian brand watches for under $1,000. It is in the EU at least. Chinese brands regularly stay in this range, but the rest quickly jump above $1,000. By the way, I'm saving Chinese brands for another video, but this goes for Tissot, it goes for Hamilton, it goes for Baltic, it goes for Christopher Ward. But Laco does sneak in under $1,000 for their entry models, and I had to have them on the list because they've got cool pilot's watches. IWC gets you premium, heavily polished, luxury interpretations of pilot's watches for a massive price premium. Stover aren't below 1,000 anymore, and they're just clean, simple, straightforward pilot's watches. Laco, though, are about pilot's watches the way I think they actually looked in the middle of the last century. It's what they do well, and it's pretty much the only thing they do. You essentially pick a size, you pick a case shape, you pick a style of finishing and material, and then you decide whether it's a Beobachtungsuhr or a regular Flieger layout. That's it. It's not particularly exciting, but it works. The movements inside are decent and appropriate for the price range. Their strength as a brand is about affordable Flieger watches with a functional and rugged lean. They're not dressy, they're not flashy, they're just cool. They've got no real weaknesses other than they do that one thing, Fliegers. And that's basically it. Don't expect anything different. Don't expect innovative design, but what you get is on point. And I'd happily pay retail. I feel they're priced reasonably fairly. Timex are originally an American company. Today, they're truly global with production all over the world. They are pretty much a fully vertically integrated brand, which means essentially like Rolex, they build everything themselves, more or less at least. For me, Timex is the eclectic mix of Swatch, Casio, and Hamilton. The Marlin, which is a staple of theirs, with a Snoopy, could easily compete with a Snoopy or a Simpsons watch from Swatch. The Ironman is a clear competitor to G-Shocks from Casio, and a Timex Expedition goes a long way to compete with the Quartz Hamilton khakis. For me, the most compelling options have always been the Marlin type watches. Those are the ones I personally associate most with Timex, and it's one of their flagship lines. Generally, sub $1,000 brands can be varied in their offerings. So Rolex, at a high level, focus on luxury, sports, mechanical watches. JLC emphasizes dressy craftsmanship. Timex and Citizen offer a wide range, including digital, quartz, mechanical, dress, divers, G-Shocks. These kind of brands are often less focused and instead have an emphasis on variety. This variety is both a strength and a weakness, as they provide decent, affordable options, but also have a lot of forgettable models. So the Ironman, as an example, is a not quite G-Shock. It's good, but not as good as a G-Shock. But the Marlin is better than anything Casio can do in terms of dressy watches. Swatch are vacation watches, including the Moonswatch. They sell millions of watches, but before COVID, they seemed like a dying brand with empty flagship stores. My impression is that the Moonswatch revitalized the brand and brought more customers into physical stores. Swatch excels in colorful designs like MoMA watches and the Moonswatch and Simpsons variations. They are affordable and fun, but not meant for longevity. That's why I say these are watches that people buy when they're on vacation. Their biggest weakness, and those of you that own one will know this, and it's a biased opinion, but it's got the loudest ticking quartz movement in the world. And it can be plain annoying. I'm not allowed to have them in the bedroom at night because my wife cannot sleep when she can hear the Swatch. They don't necessarily offer the best value for money, but they deliver on sheer fun. If you think I'm delivering something of value to you and you're new here, then consider subscribing. Subscribing is a fantastic way for me to know whether I'm making videos that are worth watching. So if it's worth it to you, click the subscribe and the notification button below. Thanks a ton. Tissot, Swiss brand, part of the Swatch group. They offer decent quartz and low-end mechanical movements. Swiss brands in general often have a price markup for the name more than you have from Japanese brands. But as an example, the Tissot PRX is a solid watch with a better bracelet, maybe same level of dial, but better finishing compared to models like a Citizen Tsuyosa, which it competes directly with. Tissot specifically have been having a moment with the PRX, which is available in quartz, mechanical, steel, and carbon. The Tissot Gentleman is another Teddy Baldessar favorite. It features a Powermatic movement and a Rolex, perpetual type design. There's just more money going into making nice looking watches, where some other big brands in this space have clearly outsourced their design process to an AI algorithm. Citizen is Japanese Tissot. That's how I position them. Tissot has the PRX, Citizen has the Tsuyosa. They also have comparable divers, comparable chronographs. I suppose you could argue that Seiko have the same, but Tissot and Citizen are generally competing more consistently at similar-ish price points. As I see it, they're a cool brand that make cool watches, but if there's one thing that is both their strength and their weakness, it's branding. And this to some extent applies to other Japanese brands as well. Tissot is relatively speaking cheaper, but there's an identity to them that I can put into words. They're more than just their watches. The same goes for Hamilton. But Citizen come across as just watches. They're moving the needle, but for years brands like Citizen have been hampered by having this simple, here's a watch, this is the price kind of marketing. Tissot, without knowing this for a fact, seems to spend more on non-value add marketing. That makes for a more expensive product, but they do just communicate something in the West that resonates with more watch-orientated people. The other weakness is, again, this sort of overemphasis on options, which leads to a lack of consistency across products in terms of aesthetic and tone. This is a volume and options company that makes decent watches for the price. Every now and again, they knock it out of the park, and then they have a ton of options on the side. Baltic, finally someone that isn't owned by a conglomerate. Baltic are a small company. They're reasonably focused. Their core products are semi-vintage style watches with a modern twist. Their designs speak to me, and I honestly like every single watch in their lineup. The Aquascaphe, the MR, the Hermetique, the Tricompexes, they're all models that on aesthetics alone I like. They focus on these semi-vintage inspired watches, and they do it well. The Aquascaphe costs $725. It offers 200 meters of water resistance. It's got a fabric or a rubber strap, and it's got a Miyota movement inside. In comparison, a Tissot C-Star costs around $500 for a quartz model and $800, $900 for the mechanical model with the steel bracelet. So ballpark, that's fine. The Powermatic moving to the Tissot is likely better with more jewels, more power reserve, but the Miyota movement is probably more comparable with Sellita SW200, which a lot of people consider superior, I think. Chinese factory watches like St. Martin, Chronos offer similar movements for almost half the price, which could make Baltic seem a little bit overpriced. But Baltic has a unique visual identity that sets it apart from other brands, especially the Chinese brands that are turning more and more to original designs, but they still lack a clear design language. Baltic is more focused, where the Asian brands, again, are first and foremost about variety. And this is turning a little bit into a Chinese versus West discussion, and that's not what this video is meant to be about. The short version is they're nice watches, they're decent options, they're not overperforming in terms of value for money, but they are really good, clear, consistent designs. Could somebody in the comments tell me how many days I've gone by since I last mentioned Studio Underdog? I forget, you see. Is it a cult? Absolutely. The hype for Studio Underdog is real, and they get talked about far more than other brands that sell the same amount of watches. Drops, and not drop shipping, which is I incorrectly used in a previous video, have contributed to the hype around Studio Underdog. Richard and the people behind this brand have done a really excellent marketing job. Are they overpriced? Not more than a whole lot of other brands. The $1,800 new Salmon model, which hasn't released yet, has an SW510 monopusher movement inside, which is identical to the one you'll find in a fairer watch for $1,995. The dual pusher version of the same movement is in a Hanhart 417 for $1,500. Their cheaper watches use a Seagull ST1901 movement, which is also found in other brands at similar prices. Seagull's own classic 1963 watch sells for $649. It's not as blatant a cash grab as some people would have you believe. But Studio Underdog are not watchmakers in the strictest definition of the term. They design colorful watches, then they source parts, and they assemble them in the UK. They've got Desert Sky and Choc Chip and Watermelon. People might tire of colors eventually, but the brand also offers more classic options for longevity. Personally, I find their watches a little bit too expensive for a short-lived thrill, but many are enjoying them. Maybe they'll enjoy them for a couple of years and then they'll move on. But for me, I want something that I'm going to wear for a longer period of time, and I just don't connect with them, despite the fact that I talk so much about them. Hamilton is a brand that most watch nerds have a connection to. When you do a YouTube video about affordable entry alternative watches, the Hamilton car key is pretty much always on the list. Hamilton are priced more or less around the Tissot price point. Tissot is more formal, more gentlemanly, more stylish. Hamilton generally lean more into themes of ruggedness, casual lifestyle, and outdoors. You see it in the more chunky Frogman, the Khaki, of course, and even in the Murph, which is a dress watch, but not really. It's just that bit more casual than a Tissot Gentleman. Value for money is about the same as Tissot, since they share a lot of the parts and Swatch Group benefits that both Tissot and Hamilton have. Their flagship has to be the Khaki line. Their enthusiast favorite is the Murph, which I still think is a stellar watch design. The Unimatic is super cool as a chrono, and I have a personal favorite, which is a dark horse, and that's the Pan Europe in red, white, and blue. The new Chronomatic American Classic, which I've not had hands-on with yet, is also really cool. Overall, definitely a worthy brand. Those are all the kinds of watches they do well. You pay a little Swiss brand premium for marketing, but designs are consistent and well thought out. They are reasonably often discounts and sales, so pick the watch you want when the option shows up. I actually had to Google this, who makes better watches, Citizen or Orient? And no real surprise, but the internet did not agree, so there was no conclusive answer. But I'm clearly Team Citizen for no other reason than I like their designs better on balance. I'll take it Soyoso over any comparable Orient, and I take the ProMaster as a much more interesting watch than any comparable Orient offering. Orient has two sorts of classifications. You've got the Orient and the Orient Star. And the thing to know is that the Star models are generally built, finished, and spec'd a little bit better. The standout offering that everybody knows the name of is the Bambino. At least also it is for me. It's the quintessential Japanese affordable dress watch, and it's definitely worth a look. Again, with the danger of angering a whole lot of people, Orient does not, in the West at least, inspire a lot of emotion. It's another one of these option brands which has a lot of stuff to choose from, and it can be a little bit hit or miss what you have, but the good stuff is really good. Seiko are probably a top 10 watch brand in the world. They sell 5 million watches a year. They sell watches from $400, and in Grand Seiko they go all the way to $100,000 under one roof. No other brand does that. Swatch Group does as a conglomerate, but Tissot doesn't make a $100,000 watch under the Grand Tissot name. If you're an enthusiast, Seiko at some point has to come into consideration. Under $1,000, they have presage dress watches, capable divers, they've got chronographs. They probably, of all the brands on the list, have the most of iconic watch designs in their collection. They've got SKXs, tuners, Willards, cocktail times. Unlike Citizen or Orient, where most people are hard-pressed to name more than the Bambino, the list for Seiko just goes on and on and on. They make good watches all around, but, and this is important, it's a feature, not a bug. Say Seiko and someone will say misaligned bezel, or bad movement accuracy, or inconsistent finishing, or cheap bracelet. People love to knock Swiss brands for how little difference they feel there is in quality compared to Chinese factory brands. But for me, the biggest divide in quality is not Europe versus China. The biggest divide is Japan versus China. In a lot of cases, Seiko at the low end has not kept up in terms of build quality. They are, in my opinion, still good watches, but they are markedly behind, dollar for dollar in terms of end product quality in many regards. What they do have, though, is great watches and a clear Seiko design ethos. Personally, I think the best Seikos are around $1,000 to $1,500, where the SPB models kick in with better movements, better bezel mechanisms, nicer dials. But under $1,000, you still have a lot of icons. They are built like tanks. The movements have been around for ages, and they might not be regulated that well, but they can be regulated fairly easily, and they still take a licking and keep on ticking. I'd say look for a good deal and enjoy their watches. I personally like the idea of ultra-minimalist dive and sports watches, but they don't appeal to me in reality. For most of Unimatic models, I feel there's too little going on. Unimatic watches are actually pretty cheap considering the specs. And how do they do that? Well, the minimalist aesthetic is generally cheap to produce. Their core designs are without expensive dials with sunray and texture, and generally not with applied plots and other fancy details. The cases are almost all sandblasted or have some other rudimentary finishing that keeps the costs down. The movements are fine, usually NH34, NH35 or comparable models. Despite my personal preference that I don't like this kind of watch because they're a little bit too simple, I think they deliver for a lot of people with a super simple, almost brutalist design. They have a market and are decent options. Likely, I think they have more longevity than brands like Underdog, as they don't follow trend colors. If you're the kind of person that has a concrete coffee table and a bare cinder block wall as part of your New York loft apartment decor, then this watch brand is probably not a bad option. If you made it all this way, there might be one of two of you thinking, what about this brand or that brand? Well, the fact is I have to choose. I picked some brands that I know well, and I know that you know well. And I also picked a couple that I just have a position on. I didn't cover any Chinese factory brands. I will, but that's for another video where I plan to have hands-on with some different ones. And that's in the making. Until next time, I hope you enjoyed the video. Share your thoughts and opinions about these brands in the comments. My opinions are not a truth. They are just where I stand on them, and I'm curious to see where you stand. Share in the comments, like, subscribe. Cheers.